Most people aren't struggling because they can't think logically. They're struggling because their nervous system is activated, and their thoughts are being shaped by emotions rooted in the past. In this episode, we explore why logic alone can't guide us when our nervous system is dysregulated, how emotions die our thinking, and why the body often reacts to what has happened rather than what is happening. This conversation is for anyone who understands things rationally, but still feels pulled, triggered, reactive, and stuck despite that understanding. My name is Michael Perry, and I'm joined today by Justin Gates. This is the New Ashla Podcast. Hello, and welcome to the New Ashla Podcast, home of spirituality, psychology, self-mastery, and shadow work. Today, we're diving into the two minds, and how often our emotional mind can take hold over our logical mind, and how to start learning how to take control of your life in these moments where we're triggered and dysregulated. Now, this is something we talk about quite often in different episodes we touch base on, but I figure it deserved its own episode. What do you think, Justin?
Yeah, it's good to come back to this stuff too, every so often, right?
Yep.
Because a lot of us do get stuck, especially us more philosophical people, the logical people, those of us who don't like to feel our feelings a lot.
Yeah.
but we're not struggling because of those things, despite those things. We're struggling because our bodies get activated when those messengers come knocking at the door. And by messenger, I mean those triggers. I know the word trigger triggers people, which is weird, but change the word trigger for messenger if that makes you feel better. But same thing, right? I mean, that word used to trigger me too, ironically. There was a time where I was like, what? Because I was
some people can use it as a weapon. I tell you what, some people think you're being triggered.
Well, they do. They use it to gaslight the crap out of us sometimes, right? But I'm one of those guys that was I was always, and I still am, for the most part, more interested in using logic and reason to bridge to spirituality, to bridge to religion, to bridge to these things, because there are bridges there. We can be logical thinkers and realists and still explore the vast universe of spirituality and psychology and philosophy. We don't have to have it one or the other. So, but we have to understand, and we're going to talk about this today. We have to talk about what our body remembers, what our body knows, what our body is telling us too. We do everything holistically here, right? It has to be a bridge to each so that we can fully understand ourselves. And that's why shadow work is a very important part of what we do.
Well, I think it's important to note, we can feel so irrational in these moments. And even people like you and me still have our moments where those triggers activate, old patterns activate, and it's easy to fall right into that. The emotional die is the way I look at it, the way our minds just get colored by the reactions going on in our body.
Die, D-Y-E, not D-I-E, right?
Exactly.
D-Y-E, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, you're 100% right, because as we teach, our perspective does what? It colors our reality, right?
Yeah.
So it is always a very timely subject to talk about. And when our bodies do get triggered, they do what? They move into protection mode, survival mode. And it doesn't matter all the pretty words you read, all the pretty words you hear, all the endless hours of meditation and all these things. Those things are very helpful. But if your perspective is colored by pain, is colored by trauma, colored by whatever the problem is, you're not going to see reality very well, because it's just going to move you into protection mode. You're going to want to shelter instead of pushing through some of the harder things that you must go through.
And it's crazy how fast it happens.
Because you can't be a mirror. You can't be reflective anymore, right? You can't learn lessons from things that are trying to mirror you and show you what's going on, especially in the mind. It's hard for us to be reflective and to do the work we need to do when we're kind of bunkering down, right?
Now, personally, it's like I've learned to really love triggers, because it's in those moments is where I can gain the most awareness of myself. It's
Hmm.
like, what's really being activated right now? What responses are being directed by my nervous system and not by my logical mind?
Right. Right. And for me, when I started really kind of doing this work a long time ago, it was one of the hardest things for me to understand. I couldn't understand the experience because I always tried to be rooted deeply in reality. But I also had these longings and these yearnings for all this other stuff too. I was like, I really want to know about this. I really want to experience this. But I would run into these roadblocks. But when I tried to think rationally, completely, instead of engaging my emotions, engaging my body and my mind and my soul all together, that's really where I had the biggest problems because I would often know what the right response should be or what the right thing to do should be. I could explain the things clearly, right? Uh, I could even see where parts of me was being helpful and unhelpful, but I just couldn't get past the bridge, the bridging of the things. And then when one of those messengers or triggers would come and knock on the door, I would just fall apart, and logic would run for the hills. So, and
Yeah.
it's not that my intelligence suddenly just disappeared. It's that when this happens, when we start to break down or we start to bunker down or hunker down,
When we get activated, I mean, it's almost like we're possessed. We talk about that scale of like passive or aggressive. On one side, you get reactive, you get in people's faces, you stand your ground to a fault. And on
right?
the other side, you cower away or act victimized. And this isn't a shortcoming. This doesn't mean you're broken, but it means in these moments, we got to learn how to bring ourselves to baseline.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I noticed in me, um, once this stuff started happening, then I would actually become confused by my reactions to things, how I would feel or how pain would show up in parts of my body that didn't make sense. Um, Let me throw some statements at you and for you guys at home too, and tell me where these land. Okay, we'll say things like, "I know this doesn't make sense, but I can't stop feeling this way." Right?
You know,
Or I understand this logically, intelligently, but I just can't calm myself down wholly. Right? My body won't calm down. My mind won't stop racing. I know this stuff, right? Um, and what I'm describing here isn't a failure of reasoning. Again, it's our bodies, the nervous system, doing exactly what it learned to do. So in this episode today, we're going to explore why logic alone can't guide us when our bodies and our minds and our souls and our hearts aren't aligned. And when our nervous system, especially when our nervous system gets activated in that survival mode, right? Uh, and to your point, we're also going to kind of explore how emotion will color and dye our thinking and completely changes our perception, whether it's actually happening or not. So
logic kind of goes out the window.
it definitely does. We'll talk about how triggers and messengers aren't random, though. These aren't just things that happen to us like that, and in just some the universe hates me type of way, right?
Yeah.
and and why just having insight, and this is going to touch upon another show we did, but why having insight without learning to heal and regulate ourselves, our bodies, often leads to just more confusion and frustration, and why we're not changing the way that we should or growing the way we should. So, and we're going to actually talk about what can help restore that alignment. You know, we'll call it clarity, but it's really just alignment at the end of the day. So, and this conversation is for anyone who understands things rationally, like us, like you said, but we still feel kind of pulled or reactive or stuck, despite that, despite knowing everything there is to know about it. Um, and this episode's for anyone that keeps asking, why do I keep reacting like this when I know better? Now I know Justin says a lot. When you know better, you must do better. And I probably should stop saying that because that's missing a lot of context, right? So
Yeah.
we're going to talk about that today. because really the truth is you don't think your way out of back into alignment, and you don't think your way out of having a dysregulated nervous system or a body that feels pain for no reason or seemingly no reason. So it's actually the opposite, right, Michael? We're going to regulate our way back into alignment and clearer thinking.
Yeah. How to stop the mind from being colored by the impressions of the body.
Right.
So that you can have control over your reactions, responses, and your life.
So if you're listening to us right now and you're thinking, look, I know this doesn't make sense to me right now, but this feels real. This feels like it can help. This episode is for you. And I want you to understand that you're not being irrational. You're not weak. You're just experiencing responses and messengers and triggers in your body that we have to address, that you have to address. So this isn't a failure of your intelligence or logic, because it's really weird. I'll just say this before we move on. A lot of people that I speak to, a lot of people I work with, they will say things to me like, man, I'm so stupid. I feel so stupid for this. And this has nothing, never has anything to do with your intelligence. You're just out of alignment. So we're going to try to make that a thing that you can practice today.
Let's dive into sort of how emotions die thoughts. What causes this chain reaction in our brains? What's actually happening? Now, I can explain this from the psychological point of view. And what happens is we have our prefrontal cortex where all our logical thinking is done. Mm-hmm. And when strong emotions flare up in our amygdala, our emotional center, which is connected throughout our body and our nervous system, as soon as that flares up, the logical part of our minds shut off. And those emotions become the guiding force in our thinking. It just rules over.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say that these thoughts never arrive to us clean and perfect and clear. They're often already jumbled up and very difficult to see, right? And because they pass through this emotional energy first before they even come to our consciousness, to our conscious part, right? And this is something very important to understand if you want to make sense of our reactions, because many of us will assume that thoughts and even emotions sometimes are neutral, and that the emotions are something that comes after the thought. But that's not the reality. Thoughts and emotions, there's not some hierarchy here. Emotions, look, in reality, especially we're talking about how we're being triggered or activated, emotion becomes the filter through which the thoughts are moving through. Does that make sense?
That's a perfect way to say it.
That's what I was trying to say. And this is how emotions die those thoughts. And it really colors how that information is interpreted, because it goes through that energetic filter, that emotional filter first, when you're activated, when you're triggered. And now you're basing your thoughts now based on that potentially distorted view of what you're feeling or what's actually happening or not happening.
When it's like all about what emotion are you feeling right now? Fear turns logic into catastrophizing. Anger turns logic into justification. Sadness turns logic into hopelessness. And shame turns logic into a self-attack. It's these different emotions that end up trying to transition our thoughts for self-preservation. It is exactly that. It is how we've known to survive. Let's take shame, for instance. If you're someone who's has a shame-based identity, whether you know it or not, if you're someone who has a lot of self-defeating thoughts, you've learned that when you're in these moments, you start having, if you're at fault for something, if something goes wrong, even if it's not your fault, it'll start transitioning into, well, maybe I messed this up. This is on me.
Right. Oh, because you've been told that a million times.
Yeah.
And you're not even being told that anymore. You just that's what your body remembers, right? But it does. It colors your thoughts. It colors how you assign meaning to things after that. What conclusions you're predicting or assuming. All right. But there's something else that we have to add in here, is that when fear is present, we don't suddenly become, logic doesn't disappear. It just reorganizes into something else. right? Fear. If we have a lens of fear in front of this too, it takes that neutral information that we think's neutral, but it's already been colored emotionally. Um, if we're being, if we're in a moment of dysregulation, and it turns everything into a threat, right? Like you just said, it really pushes logic toward that catastrophizing. And
Start seeing all the worst case scenarios.
well, yeah, and you start doing the what ifs, right? What if this gets worse? What if I lose something? What if I'm not safe? And even your reasonable, grounded concerns become amplified into, as you said, that worst case scenario. Because we're doing what? We're getting ready for something to happen. We're getting ready for something dangerous to happen. How does anger color this?
Well, anger, it easily becomes justification. You start to feel that rage. You start feeling violated. You start trying to stand your ground and push threats away. And you end up saying and doing a lot of things you probably end up regretting later.
Yeah.
That's one of the hardest ones. Yeah.
I have, and I do sometimes still. Yeah. Anger is not my friend. There are things, people say, well, there are moments of righteous anger. Sure. But never if it's in control of how you're doing things or what you're doing or how you're saying it. Because it always comes with regrets, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's important to acknowledge all these emotions are good. It's only when they take control of you do they become parasites almost. It's like anger. Anger lets you know when your boundaries are being crossed. Anger is a good emotion to let you know when you need to start drawing lines, having hard conversations. But when it takes over, that's when you can go into tyranny. That's when you can go into control.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah. And when they're colored by sadness, we move away, we move toward hopelessness, right? We'll start telling stories about permanence. This will never change. I'll always feel this way, Michael. There's no point in trying. And it's very difficult when you feel that way. And when you're in that, everything's being colored by that, it's very difficult to be logical and realistic and grounded, right? Because everything becomes just narrow and heavy. And that just continues to reinforce the belief that effort is not worth doing. It's futile, right? So, and then you'll start worrying about the future. You'll start worrying about things that haven't even happened and probably won't happen. I mean, the odds are, right? The future is always like this mathematic thing where it's like, it could be this, but it's more likely going to be this. But there's all these things in between too, depending on how you are in the present.
Yeah. I mean, it's very easy to get caught up in past patterns when this is activated because often the nervous system, it doesn't live in the present. It remembers the past, and the past becomes the present feelings you experience. I heard a long time ago, I think I've brought this up before, is when we're triggered, we emotionally regress to where that emotion is stuck. So if it's anger, we emotionally regress to where we're 5 and we had to throw a tantrum to get what we wanted or what we needed.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Or in turn, shame. It's easier to blame myself because if I do that, then I'm not in trouble with the other kids. We emotionally regress to that stage and where that emotion is stuck.
Is when you're in these states and you're in a moment of dysregulation, how powerful towards your well-being is arguing with yourself?
What's what you end up doing?
Yeah.
It's one of the hardest parts about this is like even as we express this, and again, like we said, we both still have our moments where this takes hold. It's part of being human.
It is.
But man, it's just gaining the awareness to have that footing. Like I thought I had been doing so good, and this morning I was exhausted, and I had done something that irritated Allison, and I went into that victim mentality, and I started huffing around, and she's like, "Hey, you're acting like a kicked puppy," and it's like, "Yes, I am. Thank you." It's easy for it to just grab hold.
Yeah. Yeah, it rarely works arguing with yourself, but that's what we do, right? Because we're trying to override something that's happening within us in our bodies. With first we try to reason with it, then we try to force it into submission and I'm going to make you do this, and that just doesn't work. That's why, again, shadow work is important because We integrate. We don't force. We don't beat the crap out of ourselves, right? And a lot of the times when you get into the state where you're dysregulated and you start arguing with yourself, the stuff you're arguing about is not even true. Most times, probably not. Never. I don't know. I can't say
It
never.
almost always is hyping everything up, whether it's the
Yeah,
feeling
it's just
I'm under attack or
right,
yeah.
right.
Well, I think one of the biggest issues is when these are activated. It's so convincing.
Yeah,
It feels so real in the moment.
yeah, yeah. They do. They do. Because we actually feel them, whether anybody else can feel them or not. We do, right? This is kind of the interesting thing, and I see this a lot where someone will say, well, if I say something's true to you and you're like, well, I don't feel that it's true, or you'll say, I feel such and such, and I'll say, well, that's not true, Michael. That doesn't make it less true for you in the moment because you are feeling it, and you're not only feeling it, but it becomes urgent for you, necessary, right? And
Gosh,
you
yes.
have to act on this now, right now. This is where a lot of us get trapped because we will mistake urgency for accuracy, and they're not the same thing. Because like if you're feeling something and if you feel it intensely enough and you've amped it up enough to where it is the only thing you can focus on now, because not only are you thinking about it, but you can see it, you can find evidence of it everywhere you go, and you know all your emotions and all the things are pointing to this because you have now just kind of let it take control, right? You assume, and it's probably not a bad, it's a very logical thing to assume that it must be important and it must be true, but it's not a truth signal. Urgency is not something that always alerts you to the truth. It's just you're getting, you're kind of spiraling right at that point, especially when you perceive a threat. And notice that, Michael, I said perceive, right? Doesn't mean there
Yeah.
actually is one.
Well, and like you said, I mean, often our minds are lying to us. It's giving us a story. It's feeding us a narrative that empowers, disempowers, whatever your flavor is. It's this narrative that starts getting hashed in your mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just used the word that you probably shouldn't use. And I corrected myself though, right?
You
Uh,
know?
because think of this as an actual survival thing. Your adrenaline starts to pump, your attention will narrow, right? Because you're trying to stay alive. Time just stops existing in a way that it normally does for us. And we get our whole body moves into that act of being ready. Um, and the mind's job is not there's no room for wisdom there. There's no room to when this stuff's happening. And as we always say, we fall back to our lowest level of healing or our lowest level of training.
The facts get thrown out the window.
Well, yeah, because wisdom's not important at this point. And we'll start thinking these words, and we'll actually start using these words like always, never, you must, right now type things. And because it frames everything that's happening to you as an emergency, which they're probably not most of the time.
No,
Again, I
I mean,
can't.
again, it's our bodies are a log of the past. And so often it is this feeling of urgency because in the moment when that emotion got repressed, it was urgent. You were a kid getting screamed at for no reason. It is so hard to feel anything but helplessness.
Yeah, right. Well, this is why every spiritual tradition, probably every school of psychology in some way or another. I don't know them all, but I'm just gonna guess, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. This is why we always and forever, and I just used one of those words I shouldn't have used, but this is why we um, all work towards trying to calm ourselves down, because when we are calm, we can hold that complexity. We can start to think with wisdom instead of, right, just these quick responses that all just kind of narrow everything down and keep us safe. Um, we can use wisdom in a way that we can't when we're freaking out. Um, because again, our thoughts just collapse into these very narrow things that it's like, okay, safe or unsafe, right? Right or wrong, me or them. That's a big one. Me or them. It's me or
That
you.
is a good one.
Me or them. And the subtleties of life and the things that are actually happening start to disappear. They didn't stop being real. Just we didn't have the capacity to hold them and being extreme survival, dealing with emergency at the same time. This is why trying to think your way out of these things often makes things worse, doesn't it?
Almost always.
Almost all.
When it's like you see the chaos going on in the world nowadays, and it's exactly that. So many people are activated, and it's so hard to think rationally, to act rationally. And when we're dysregulated, I mean, I don't know why this is not something talked about in schools, talked about in homes. And again, you're right. This is what therapy is all about. The different schools of psychology, self mastery. It is
Mhm.
learning to be dysregulated and be okay at the same time. It is
Yeah,
learning to calm yourself down and act from a rational place instead of being controlled by your emotions.
right. And this is something that a lot of people who primarily walk their paths through the spiritual one, and they often forget the other things. Or people who are super smart, they tend to neglect the soul or the heart, um, and most of them neglect the body. But we have to realize that our inner authority begins with the body, and it must be included in everything, because if we don't deal with that, the stuff just keeps coming up in different ways, and we can't talk our way out of it. We can't think our way out of it. We can't love our way out of it, right? We have to align. We have to align, because if you're not trying to align all the parts of yourself, including the shadow, then how can you be discerning of anything, Michael?
Completely.
Now, you're talking about you said that the body or the nervous system is a log of the past. Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah, I mean, again, when we go through emotionally traumatic events, and this is big T, little t, we all have learned how to function in society a certain way due to not necessarily what happens to us, but how we internalize it.
Right.
And these survival systems that we have cultivated usually happened at specific points when that was the response that we felt would protect us in that moment. Again,
Hmm.
whether that's anger, fear, whether that's fawning or freezing,
Hmm.
these responses are what is ingrained in our nervous system. And so when we are activated, our body goes back to that place in time and brings forth the same emotion that got stuck in that moment. And it regresses us emotionally. It regresses us logically. It
Right.
is, yeah,
Well, and here's why, right? Our nervous system doesn't have a dude that keeps a calendar of all these things, right? It's not organized by dates or logic or factual timelines, or even sometimes what actually happened. It doesn't keep track of those things in that way. Something happened, you felt a certain way, you didn't deal with it for whatever reason, and then it comes back later when something similar happens. Because as you said, it only organizes itself around experience. What happened, and again, the details aren't important to it. It's something happened, right? It's around the experience. It's around a tone. It's around an energy. It's around what felt threatening or overwhelming or whatever, right?
yeah. I mean, they talk about in healing, you got to feel it to heal it, right?
Right.
It's a lot of us spend our lives running from that, whether we're compulsive, dissociating, staying busy or productive, whether we're apathetic and afraid to try in life. And often these are not conscious processes. We talk about the unconscious mind all the time, which I believe the body is the unconscious mind. 95% of our thoughts are colored by this emotional body. And even when it's not triggered, it is running the show.
Yeah.
That's why
Yeah.
so many people, I don't feel like doing that today. Or I felt compelled to do this.
Hmm.
Or they stick with the system they've always known, whether that's just tinkering with things and being busy all the time to avoid sitting in that emotional funk that we all spend our lives running from.
Sitting in the mud, as you call it, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, and because of these things, our bodies don't ask us, is this happening now? Rather, they ask, what? Does this feel familiar? Does this seem similar to something? I don't know exactly what, but I'm not happy now, right? And it could be simple things like a look, a tone of voice. I have had to work really hard trying to not change how I do things, but be more mindful. Thank you. More mindful of how I do things. A look, tone of voice, a pause at a weird spot. With Heather, I've really had to, because I was triggering her in ways that I couldn't even understand, because I didn't realize, right, that this stuff was doing that. How can a look do this? How can my tone of voice do this? Whereas I use tone of voice, inflection and things to make a point or whatever. But to her, that might have been, that's the kind of inflection she would get before she'd get her butt whooped or whatever, right? So it is really one of those things where it's important for us to be mindful in a way that we create as few ripples as we can, right, away from us. This is why we always talk about responsibility. It's why we always talk about respect. It's why we always talk about keeping ourselves not in check, but keeping ourselves impeccable.
In alignment?
In alignment and impeccable as we can. It's something I learned in all my previous job. It was about how I showed up. It was about how I spoke. It was about how, down to the crease in my pants sometimes. And that all matters. We talk about communication all the time and all this stuff. All this stuff bridges together because it's important, especially if you don't know who you're talking to. And I've been married to her for going on 25 years now, and I'm still learning some of these things, Michael.
Well, I think a big part of it is, as we evolve, as we heal, as we grow, as we live life, we adapt as we process this thing, feel it to heal it.
Mm-hmm.
We enter new stages, new evolutions of understanding. Or sometimes we regress. One of the conversations I had with Allison recently is, it's like, I notice when she gets upset, she'll start nitpicking on things. And I didn't realize until we started talking about it, because I get irritable in return. Right. And it's like, what's really going on within me? And for me, it was that abusive relationship I was in. Whenever she was upset, she would find everything to complain about, everything to probe at and say is a problem. And this isn't anything to do with my present relationship. This is all my past. Just
not even have nothing to do with you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're fine, dude. You're not doing anything wrong, but you fall back to that, as we're talking about.
Yeah.
And you really can't help it, right? Until you start to grab hold of these things as they come through, little by little. But this is why these reactions feel disproportionate to what's actually happening, because it doesn't have to be the same literal things. It just carries those same feelings, those same signatures, right?
Yeah.
And it's not like our body's reacting as if it's happening again as it did. This isn't symbolic. It's just preparing itself, because this tone, this look, this feel, this energy is similar enough for us to go, all right, let's get ready.
This feels familiar.
Let's get ready. We're either going to fight or run, right?
Yep. Well, it's like, anyone listening, if this is something you struggle with, all right, this isn't something where, again, awareness, now it's going to be fixed. Right. Make your first step just being able to notice it, because that's often what the first step is, and it's a long step of noticing it and noticing it and noticing it before you're able to stop this from hijacking your system.
And that's exactly why insight alone isn't enough. I will say, I would like to say that it's insight alone often isn't enough, but really, I mean, it's without practice, it's really kind of not helpful. You have to be ready to practice too, right? Because look, you can understand your history perfectly clear, Michael. You can still remember every little thing that happened, and you can know this, but you're still going to react. If you don't address it, you don't practice some of these things, you're going to just keep reacting as if you were actually there again instead of being here right now.
Every time.
Because you cannot logically explain any of this to your body, can you?
No.
It doesn't speak our language in that way.
Not at all.
We could just hook up a podcast to our nervous system and just let it listen to it for 300 hours, and then we'd be fine, right? Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice? And then but this is where blame comes in, right? We will blame ourselves because why am I reacting like this again? I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. I've read the books. I've listened to the two guys on the New National podcast, and I'm still reacting this way. Why can't I just let this go? That's something I hear a lot. Why can't I just let this go? Because you'll go to somebody and you'll say, this is what's happening. And they'll say, well, you got to learn to let it go. You got to learn, just learn to let it go.
Depending on how much something imprints on your nervous system, man.
Right. Well, we're human beings. It's difficult to let anything go, even when we know exactly how to. Even when we practice, it's still difficult to let things go. So for somebody who's just has all the insight and is no integration, no practice, it's even harder. Because I know better, Michael. Why do I still feel this way?
Well, I guess this is the real question, is why does logic fail when we're activated?
This is, again, one of the most frustrating things we can go through, especially for people who are very smart and very sharp and very, intellectually minded, right? They're just, everything is about logic and reason and groundedness. That's why things freak them out when they're not healed. Especially when you place a lot of value on insight and self-reflection and responsibility. We talk about this stuff a lot, right? And we'll reach for logic because it always seemed to help us grow in the past. We can grow a little bit with knowing and knowing some more and knowing some more. And at times when we're not freaking out, we can actually reason with ourselves and try to integrate in a line, right? We can analyze together. Justin, let's analyze this, man. What are you doing? And we can almost to a point explain why I shouldn't feel this way. I can talk to myself. But that doesn't always work. And sometimes it never works. Not because it's wrong, because it's not, again, your logic isn't operating independently of, it's not removed of the body. It's not removed of the mind. It's not removed of the heart, of the soul, right?
95% of your thoughts, right?
Right, exactly. And again, when we're activated, when we're really, really upset and everything's colored by this emotional energy, logic gets pulled into a different kind of alignment with everything else. It's like, nope, logic, no, you're with us, bro. You don't get to hang out over here and feel okay. You're coming with us. So, right, because we hunker down, we pull everything together. That's why it's difficult to reassure ourselves, right? Or even to get reassurance when this stuff is happening. It's difficult to reassure somebody, hey, you're fine. Oftentimes that's completely opposite of what they're going to believe.
Yeah, their narrative's already playing.
Yes.
On repeat. Yeah.
I responding to emergencies for a living, I would always hear responders say, listen, you're safe now. I'm here. You're safe now. Hey, it's not that bad. Stuff doesn't work, man. I'm telling you from experience, it does not work. It oftentimes flicks them into a different kind of spiral. Yep. And you have to know this stuff. You have to understand this stuff, right? Because all they hear is, Michael, you're just dismissing me. I went through something really horrible right now, and you're just dismissing me. You don't care.
Yeah,
you don't care.
Or they're feeling pressured to feel a certain way. When it's like it goes against their reality, because again, that's what's happening. Their perception has become skewed, and you can't change someone's reality when they're already convinced that this is real.
Right, and you could come up and you could have all the knowledge in the world and even wisdom. Wisdom does not crack this shell. Outside wisdom does not crack this shell until you're ready to hear it. Right. and not because any of this is we're trying to just move them along because we're cruel and we want them to just immediately feel better. But again, they're feeling something that is real and urgent and immediate, and you can't see it. I get it. I can't see or feel or experience what they're going through, especially if it's just me and them standing there and I'm looking around and there's nothing happening, you know. But to them it is. And for me to say, listen, you're safe now, or whatever, you know, to say it, you can reassure in a way, and but you have to make sure that you're meeting them where they're at and match that reassurance there, and then build over the next several minutes. There were times where I was on calls for 2.5 hours because it took me that long to kind of finally get them to chill out and calm down a little bit so they could see what I see. Because what I see is everything's safe, everything's fine. So it is, you just have to understand that this stuff feels very dismissive for them because it is, whether it is actually happening in reality right now is irrelevant, because they are feeling it and their body feels it, and they will lock up, or they will fight, which are my least favorite ones to deal with.
Yeah.
Or whatever. So, but this is why logic fails during these times, because there's no calm, receptive system in place right now. It's just crazy. It's chaos.
Yeah. Well, and it's just, I mean, the issue is they're trusting their activated conclusions. They are believing the narrative. And there is so much danger when we're activated to let our minds go ahead and do that spiral, because the more we go down it, the more we fall into activation.
Yes.
I mean, the feelings are real.
Yes.
When we're activated, do not discredit what is going on within you. That's one of the worst things you can do. What you repress, what you resist persists. And often it'll lead to a worse spiral.
I'll give you another example. You ever been to a hospital and you're in extreme pain and they don't believe you?
I haven't been through that, but I've seen it several times.
They hook you up to all the machines. They put the aux reader here or here. They hooked all the heart monitors up to you, and they do all the things, and all the machines are telling them what? This person is fine. They're absolutely fine. They don't feel fine. They are experiencing pain. I don't care if you can see that or not. It doesn't make it less real for them, just because you can't quantify it through these readings. That's why that job's really hard, right? I'm not bashing on healthcare workers, because they can, and I'm not a healthcare worker, but I've seen this where people feel like they're on fire sometimes, physically, literally. They're not though. Like, no evidence of burn, no evidence of any of this stuff.
But all the signs are checked off, like, now you're doing okay.
Right. So to tell them, hey, you're fine. There's nothing wrong with you. That's not going to help. It's not very helpful.
Nah. So if anything, it's going to dissolve trust.
100% it does. Because everybody I know that's gone through that, and I haven't gone through that, but I know people that have. I've been at their bedside while it's happened, right? Yep. They will tell you, I'm never going back to a hospital again. I'm never going back to the ER again. I'm never going to see a doctor again. And then sometimes it gets worse for them, right? Because those underlying things. Now, in all fairness, when you go to an ER, you go to get medical help, those doctors are under very strict timelines. They don't get more than 15 minutes with you, or they get in trouble, or someone else comes in that's more
acute.
I'll say urgent with quotes, because maybe what's happening to them you can actually see, right? You can actually get readings on. They don't have time.
And just from work in the medical field, the other issue is with doctors is you have so many people that come in who are probably even in chronic pain but have addictions, and they're trying to make sure that they don't enable or anything like that, which is not a good thing, because you have so many people that are going in there that are in acute pain. But I know that's a big factor within the medical field, and why.
That too. But and that's a whole rabbit hole I can go down for 12 hours, but that's not what this show's about. So we're not going to talk about that stuff.
Nah.
So what are the dangers of trusting these stories and conclusions and things that we have created during these times of crisis?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is we we exit reality and we go into disconnection. We
Mm.
get disconnect from the people around us. We disconnect from resolution. We disconnect from being able to make a situation better.
Yeah, we disconnect from truth, right? Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because again, what we feel is real. I've gone through some things that I couldn't even explain to people, but I knew it was happening to me. I just didn't know what it was or how to explain it. And I just had to keep trying to calm myself down. The sensations are real. The emotional energy moving through you is real. There is not, there's nothing imaginary, exaggerated about that experience that's happening. And I can't say this enough, right? Trying to deny or suppress that only does what? As you said, it deepens it. It makes it worse.
When it makes those thoughts go crazy. And it's not a matter of stopping the thoughts. It's being able to pause and not be obedient to the thoughts, because that's what drives us down the wagon, drives us down the trail, is we
Yeah,
end up getting hijacked by these thoughts. We let them carry us down the road, and we disconnect from reality. And it
right.
is very real for us. Like you said, we cannot stress that enough. It is your reality. But
Right.
often this is a danger from the past we're feeling and not a danger in the present.
Right.
This is something that can be addressed, confronted, dealt with.
Yep.
But when we start trusting these activated conclusions, we start going into these survival responses, whether that's being angry and lashing out at those we love, or it's tucking away our emotions because we're afraid we'll be invalidated if we feel anything.
Well, because there is a priority here now, right? When this is happening, the priority is protection.
Yeah, safety.
Accuracy be damned. That's not important anymore. Wisdom's
Yeah.
not important. And your mind will do its best to create that coherence under stress. But is coherence the same as clarity, Michael? Because you can create a story in the moment that makes sense based on what you're feeling, what you're going through, but it's missing all the proper context. It's distorted or a lot of times premature. Because yes, this thing feels like this thing, but it doesn't mean it's going to conclude to this thing. And this is where we have to learn to try and regulate and calm down. Um, this is why, have you ever made a decision while you were dysregulated or triggered?
Yes.
Made a decision and then regretted that later, right? We talked about, decisions made in anger where we're like, oh man, I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah. Well, that's
I
like
re-
I was bringing up in the other episode a couple weeks ago. I had made a mistake at work, and it was a
Mhm.
fairly big mistake. And
Yeah.
my nervous system got activated. My thoughts started going. It's like, look, you need to start looking for a new job. This isn't working out. You're not doing good
Yeah.
at this. And it just
Right.
started taking me down that trail. And luckily, I was able to take that pause and be like, I'm
Yeah.
triggered right now. Let's sit with this. Let's let it be here, but let's not let it tell me what to do.
Right. Right. The pause. One of the most powerful superpowers we could develop. And everybody's born with the ability to do it. You don't have to be born on Krypton or anything, right? Because the pause allows our thoughts to exist and allows ourselves to be without immediately acting on things or believing everything that we're telling ourselves or building this shell around ourselves.
It's like we've dove in really deep into like how this mechanism in our minds work, how we get triggered. But let's get into regulating. If we can start regulating before interpretation, we can save ourselves so much headache. Now, there's a book out there that I recommend for everyone called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and it is one of my
Mm-hmm.
favorite books. And he
Classic.
talks about in there how we have not just ego and spirit, but we also have a pain body that likes to take hold. It likes to, and the goal of the ego, the goal of the pain body is for it to convince us we are it,
Yeah.
to see life through its eyes. And he talks about how one of the best things we can do when these things try to take over is to separate the mind from the body. And one of the greatest meditative practices I've found for when I get triggered, when I get dysregulated, when something is going on, is to, as soon as I notice it, to go into my body and just feel the sensations, the anxiety, that pressure in the chest, the high heart rate, feel all that and just disconnect my mind from it.
Right.
Take that pause and just Allow myself to feel the sensations without letting it color my thoughts.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this has been one of the best methods I have found.
Well, because we try to do things backwards, and it seems logical to do it this way, that understanding should come first, right? And we're often taught that you need to understand what's happening.
We want certainty.
We do want certainty, and that should come first. And if we could just figure something out, or name it correctly, or think about it clearly, then relief will immediately follow that. But our body doesn't do it that way. Our body does not approach it that way. Our body wants to be settled. It wants to be calm before it allows us to start doing those things, the understanding part, right?
Yeah. Start thinking rationally.
Because clarity comes after that. You have to work yourself back to center, back to stillness, and not perfect stillness, not but you gotta bring it down, and you have to start regulating what's happening as you can. Because
gotta
again,
deactivate that amygdala.
because when you try to understand it, or you try to figure it out or whatever while this is happening, that interpretation you're gonna come to, that conclusion you're gonna come to, is unreliable. You're trying to make sense of something while the literal system that's built into you, that is responsible for your actual literal survival, is on high alert.
Yeah. And it's usually in the past.
that is another priority. That's a whole different priority. We must live first. We must live. We must take care of this, right? You can't be wise and all this stuff, and you can't try to figure everything out until you at least start to calm down. So, and I don't say you have to come all the way down, right? Just as you begin to start to settle, as you begin to start taking back control of these things, even if it's slightly, even if it's just tiny, little by little, right? Your field of awareness, as you start to come down this way, your field of awareness will start to open up again. Because again, everything narrows in on one thing. So you can start to breathe more deeply. Your muscles will start to soften. Time will start to feel more normal again, right? That the sense of urgency will start to fade, even just a little bit. And this is important. It's okay for it to do it little by little.
Yeah. And it usually will be little by little. There's no switch that gets activated and you're calm again. Practice your breath work. If you're around people you trust, say, "Hey, I need a minute. Let me calm myself down." Take space. That's one of the greatest mechanisms I've found, is especially if you're someone who's aggressive or angry, when you get activated, just say, "Hey, I need to let off some steam real quick. Let me come back to this conversation in a little bit."
Well, because you're trying to use things like nuance and context and choice while your system is in overload. That's why again, regulation must come before the interpretation. You have to let your body settle. Let it be in charge of settling. Settle your body, and the rest will start to align again.
Yeah. And once you bring yourself to that spot, you'll see things more accurately.
Yeah.
Because the issue is, when that tunnel vision up, when you're back to that 5-year-old self, your mind is painting all these pictures that aren't even happening around you. It is trying to prove the threat is real.
Right. Yeah. And I want to point out that this process of calming down or regulating our bodies again, so we can start to open back up, it does not mean suppressing anything, especially your emotions. We got to start to regulate and calm ourselves down enough to where we can now be conscious of the present and be present. Right?
Well said. And again, it's like that whole disconnect the body, right? When you feel it in your body and you disconnect the mind, when you sit with those feelings, they will dissipate. That is sitting with your feelings. That is allowing them to process through your system and not get stuck.
That's right. And there's lots of ways to do this. You're never going to hear me, and Michael can vouch for this. I never gave you the perfect way to do any of this, right? It was, here are some things I want you to try. Stick with what works for you. Right? There's no perfect diet for you, Michael. There's no perfect book for you. There's no perfect meditation for you. You'll find the one that you can find the one that's perfect for you, is what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
I don't have the perfect tools for you. I do have a toolbox full of things you can try, right? But these things involve, grounding, slowing our breath down, making sure, trying to start becoming more aware of opening up to things in the environment. There's a poster, there's a book, there's a whatever, right? Working on pausing ourselves and slowing down our reactions to things mindfully, consciously. So only after you start to calm down at the end of the day here is once you start to calm down, then you can start to use logic and start to try to understand, right? But it doesn't fit. That feels backwards to us, right? We want to, because we're taught that, our intelligence, our logic, our mind, our reasoning is the most powerful part of us. And it's just one part of us. And it gets affected by these things too.
It's learning to integrate these parts of you when you are going through it, when you are getting activated. And again, first step is just noticing it. It's going to take you noticing it 10, 20, 30, 100 times, depending on how much you've let your nervous system override your rational mind.
Yeah.
It starts with that. Then you can start doing that pause, because the pause is a superpower. It is what allows you to not have regret after being triggered.
Yeah.
It's integration over control.
Right. Yeah, because look, this is about building relationship. It's not about dominating our emotions with reason and logic or anything else. And it's not about obeying our emotions, right? It's about entering a relationship with them so that we can understand each other. Because as we always say, when you try to control things, eventually it will betray you. You cannot control everything. We can't force our way through everything. That may work for you sometimes, but I promise you it won't work for you all the time. Because you will get feedback. You will get pushback eventually. If you haven't yet, you will. And it pushes hard. So when emotion is obeyed, when we just give over to emotions without any kind of discernment, right? We're just one continuous reaction after the other. And we make decisions hastily, and we make them with regret sometimes, probably a lot.
Yeah.
We lose our boundaries. But when emotion is, when we try to force it and dominate it and override it with willpower or logic or any of this stuff, something else happens, doesn't it?
Yep.
Our body will stop trusting our mind. The bridge that's supposed to be there will crumble if you try to do that eventually. We have to be in alignment with each other. We must honor these bridges to each other. They're all important. Not the mind isn't the most important thing. The heart isn't the most important thing. The body, so on and so forth. We don't need parts of ourselves losing trust in the rest of ourselves or in other parts of ourselves, because your emotions will go underground, and that shadow will grow, as you're fond of saying, that shadow will grow into a monster that we can't even imagine. So
when it comes to the bridge of our emotions and our mind, why it's so important. I mean, if you look at all of healing, there is one central thing. There is one central goal. And it is being able to train your nervous system that you are safe.
Right.
Because that is what it's known its whole time, that it's not safe. So It's about being able to have these moments where you're able to sit with it, to have a different outcome that slowly does this. And it doesn't happen the first time. It doesn't happen the 10th time. But over repetition, you slowly train your nervous system that you are safe when you feel threatened, that you can handle what's happening in your life.
Yeah.
That you are strong enough to be both assertive and empathetic.
There's something that I taught you very early on, was that in this work that we do, your healing and your inner authority are not bound by choosing between feeling and thinking, right? I never wanted you, and I never encouraged you, or I've really discouraged you a lot, not to get into the space where you are choosing between feeling and thinking. It's more about knowing when each of those things belong. There's a sequence to this. What is that sequence?
It's about feeling first, allowing those things to exist within you, then regulating. Once you do that, once you get to that baseline, then you can start thinking about the situation.
Right.
about the different angles. Then you can choose your response.
Yeah. So we have to feel first, not analyze, not justify, not judge or explain, right? Acknowledging what is present in the body before the story, before anything else. Just being present with that and feeling it and nothing else. Emotion before interpretation, right? Feeling before then we try to start to regulate, as you said. We got to bring ourselves out of this urgency. We got to slow our breath down. We got to start grounding our body by forcing ourselves, well, not forcing ourselves, but allowing ourselves to start to see, open up and see what's around us and what's actually happening.
Well, it's
Right?
just like our code, right? Emotion yet peace.
Motion yet peace. Yes. Then we can start to think once that happens, right? Because we want to be able to think with clarity. We want to be able to open up and be able to see and be present in what's actually happening. Because now our logical selves, our things can serve understanding of what's happening now. And that's where insight will start to illuminate what's happening instead of just dismissing it. It's like, again, when you're trying to, when things are going crazy and you're trying to think about it, your mind is like, stop, we're not doing that right now. I don't have time for that. I got to move. I got to do this. I got to figure out how to navigate this or shield us from that or whatever. Right. So, and then, like you said, you finally choose, because those choices made in this moment, they actually reflect what's actually happening. And you can start to respond instead of react. And it doesn't allow your body to reject everything the mind says from now on. You still regain that trust between the different parts of yourself,
which is a big part of this work.
It is.
We start having these protector parts, these firefighter parts, these wounded parts, these rejected parts, and they're all trying to work in this crazy system we've created with our own network of understanding of how the world works. But it's important to remember, your nervous system isn't broken. It's protective, it's patterned, it's rooted in history, and that's all it knows.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't know the self-help books. It doesn't know the advice you've been given or the affirmations you've had. What it knows is what has happened. It knows what has worked, and that is what it operates from. When you learn to recognize when your thoughts are being colored by past emotion, you regain choice. Clarity isn't forced. It returns naturally when safety is restored, and that's something you have to train into your body.
Well said.
Do you have any parting advice you want to give our listeners before we jump into affirmations?
Yes. Please stop calling yourself stupid because you don't understand what's happening. That doesn't make you stupid. There's nothing wrong with your intelligence or wrong with your logic when this stuff happens. It's not your mind is not broken. And the things you know and the insight you have isn't useless, right? This thing that's happening to us is simpler and more human than that. Your nervous system is doing what it's designed to do. Long before you had insight, long before you knew better, long before all this stuff, it's doing what it's supposed to do. And it will, but it will do it by any means necessary, right? So that's what's causing the problem. It's trying to protect you using pattern recognition, man. It's just all it is. You recognize a pattern, you go, oh shit, here it comes. When you can start to really understand this, not while you're freaking out, while you're calm and hopefully listening to this calm, you can open up and see. You can understand this, and that struggle for when it does happen, or the after action report of the next time it happens, maybe you'll be, a little wiser, or that struggle will soften a little bit, I hope. And hopefully you'll stop arguing with yourself for having reactions. You'll stop judging yourself for having reactions, and you'll stop demanding perfect clarity, right? From a body that's just hasn't learned to feel safe. And hopefully you'll stop masking this urgency for truth and this crazy intensity for accuracy, because neither one of those things are true when this is happening. And just be mindful of the sequence, right? Give that to me again, Michael. What's the sequence? Give that to us one more time.
It's being able to feel your emotions first, then regulate your nervous system, then you can start thinking about it, and then you can choose your response.
Yes. Yeah. This is just again about alignment. That's how we find our power, our authority over ourselves through alignment. So the next time you notice yourself spiraling or reacting or feeling pulled in 1,000 different directions, despite knowing better, I want you to remember this. You don't need to think harder. You just need to calm yourself down, or allow yourself to calm down, allow yourself to feel safe. Try and notice what's actually happening. And this thing is not something you reason your way into. And it's not something you can help others reason their way into either.
No.
That's something else that's important. We all have people. If this episode, if you don't get out of it something, if you're already kind of to a point where you already know how to do this stuff, and you have people in your life that don't, just kind of remember some of these things. We can't talk them out of feeling this way. We can't make them feel better by, right, telling them they're safe and they're whatever. We have to sit with them and let them regulate, let them calm down as they will. So I'm not sure if I said that right. I was hoping that makes sense.
No, I think you said it perfect. Sitting in the mud with them, not trying to pull them out of it.
It's just something I've seen a lot of. And just, because everywhere I go, there was something crazy happening, actual emergencies, right? So those are hard enough to get people to calm down. But sometimes you being there is all they need. Other times you might have to sit with them for a couple of hours until they do it. So, and don't judge them for being that way. And don't judge yourself for not being able to get them there, right, immediately. And you may not even, how many times I've handed people off to others, Michael? So many times. Because I'm not always the right fit for that person when they're trying to come down off of this craziness, off of this crazy chaos that's happening. Sometimes you're not the right guy for it. And we have to understand that too, for those of us who are caretakers for people. So that's what I'll leave it at.
No, it's beautiful. For our affirmations today, I do not mistake emotional urgency for truth. My thoughts are influenced by my nervous system, and that does not make me broken. I can feel strong emotions without immediately obeying it. I trust clarity that arrives after regulation, not conclusions formed in fear. And I am learning to listen to my body without letting the past run my present. For our journaling prompts today, what emotions most often dye my thinking when my nervous system is activated? Ask yourself, what are your normal trauma responses? What is it that activates them? What are the normal thoughts that come up, and where does this come from? In what situations do I feel urgency, even when there is no immediate danger? And what changes in my thinking once I slow down, ground, and regulate? And this one's important because then you can start tracking what the thought patterns are, where the gaps are in your logic, and how you can start having that pause and calming your system down. If you found this episode helpful, please like, comment, subscribe. If you think it could help someone you know, please share it. We're all about spreading the love and just trying to make the world a better place. Also, follow us on all the different channels, YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, TikTok. We're all over. With love and gratitude, Ad Lucem.
Ad Lucem.